what made Coach Smith the greatest coach to ever coach.
That ability to touch humanity in such a fine way.
There's been nothing like it, and he set that standard.
Every day he showed up trying to make us better, and he set that example.
He taught a lot more than basketball. He built character. Our practices built character in us as we did things.
The stand that he took and what he taught his players every year was about freedom.
He is a legend on and off the basketball court. He coached some of the nation's top players, but he also took a stand for equality that changed the sport of basketball forever.
That's right, Penn, and it was that stand that had the nation paying tribute to Carolina coach Dean Smith today. He received the country's highest civilian award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
And we are live. It's kind of cool being here by ourselves in this gigantic Dean Smith Activity Center here in Chapel Hill. It's a 22,000 seat building that is really doubling as a shrine to not only to North Carolina basketball, but also to the man, Coach Smith himself.
That is why we are here this evening to honor Coach Dean Smith, and we begin with Todd Gibson.
Miss Linnea Smith accepting on behalf of her husband, Dean Smith.
With North Carolina head basketball coach Roy Williams looking on, Dean Smith's wife Linnea strolls to the White House podium moments away from accepting the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her husband.
Now, this medal has been bestowed on more than 500 deserving people,
including now Dean Smith, whose on-court success was matched only by his efforts to change deep-seated societal norms that were in need of change.
He recruited the first black scholarship athlete to North Carolina and helped integrate a restaurant and a neighborhood in Chapel Hill.
On a day that saw Ernie Banks, Oprah, and former President Bill Clinton honored as well, Tobacco Road stood tall thanks to a former coach who was much more than just a coach. Todd Gibson, WNCN News.
That was Todd Gibson reporting. There was so much love in that room today in Washington. But I tell you what, nobody loves him more than his wife, Dr. Linnea Smith. She is his confidant, his safe harbor in times of a storm. But you know what? If that means that she has to keep their private life even that much more private, that's what she's going to do, because that's the kind of woman she is. She is gracious, deep, and protective. Perhaps that is why it surprised a lot of people when Dr. Linnea Smith accepted my request for an interview. She shares this spacious, secluded home in Chapel Hill with legendary coach Dean Smith. And honoring her request, our conversation would focus solely on his being named a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. What do you think he will be thinking about the Presidential Medal of Freedom?
That's an excellent question. It's I'm sure it's a pinnacle, an award for him. He's always struggled a little bit with recognition, and he always has been a little bit uncomfortable being singled out for awards.
This award is bittersweet for the Smith family. A pinnacle, yes, but Coach Smith did not attend the White House ceremony. And as much as others would have wished that Coach could be there, I think you told me that you just didn't think it would be fair to him.
Travel is difficult for him, being in a very busy environment and not familiar environment would have been difficult for him.
It is difficult for the family to openly discuss Coach Smith and his health issues. They're not ready, and they don't want his illness to detract from the White House celebration. They wanted nothing to take away from the joy other recipients and their families will share. Dr. Smith is beyond proud of her husband, happy that his off-the-court achievements will get the recognition they deserve. There are parts of his life that were not as celebrated.
It's not, there are parts of his life that are not as public, and then he's tends to be a private person. I think the basketball enabled him or gave him a position as a public figure, and he took that responsibility very seriously, and then he did things that he thought were important to impact change or educate the public.
Dr. Smith is pretty sure that even with the spotlight shining on him and his amazing achievements, Coach Smith would not lose sight of the fact that he's part of a team of extraordinary people who share their talents with the world. If he saw injustice unfairness, it made him mad enough to, I've got to do something about this?
Made him determined. Maybe would fortify his determination to do what he could to bring about change.
Dr. Smith, Coach Smith, both remarkable people. Dr. Smith told me that in time she will be ready to talk publicly in some detail about Coach Smith's medical condition, how she has become his primary caretaker, and what a typical day is like for both of them. I'm looking forward for that visit, and I would love to share that interview with all of you as well. Penn?
And Pam, thank you for sharing. Back to that award and really how truly rare this is, not only for a coach, but for a North Carolinian to get this honor. Only 3 coaches have ever won the award: Dean Smith, Tennessee women's coach Pat Summitt, and the great John Wooden of UCLA. The list is equally short for North Carolinians who have won the Medal of Freedom. We're talking Andy Griffith, Richard Petty, Billy Graham, and now Coach Dean Smith. Okay, we're showing you a live look at the top of the Dean Dome, and if you come to a game here, you kind of stare up here in wonderment, thinking, how did they get so many banners? Well, of course, Dean Smith had a lot to do with a lot of these. He has 2 national championships, 879 wins, 2 of those 6 national championships. Here's the thing, though. In order to win the Presidential Medal of Freedom, you've got to do a lot more than compile a bunch of stats. Well, over the last few months, we have asked that question. What did Coach Smith do to deserve this award? And here's the answer from those who know him best. When Dean Smith got the Presidential Medal of Freedom, what was your first reaction?
About time.
I think I sent my 5th tweet ever out when that happened. Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
you had 5 tweets and that was one of them.
That's right.
If something is really right, it really gives you a much greater feeling, and this thing was really right.
That's how they feel after knowing him for decades. But what about first impressions? Those are important. And Coach Smith's first impression was often that of brutal honesty.
Coach Smith made a recruiting trip to my house and told me that I wasn't good enough to play.
Yeah, how many coaches go to someone's house to tell them they're not
Very few.
Getting an offer?
Very few, but that's another thing that he taught me, to always be honest.
Even to All-American National Player of the Year, Phil Ford.
About the only coach that told me that I wasn't going to start, I wasn't going to play a whole lot. He actually told me that North Carolina has a junior varsity team. My mom sat me down, who's a French and English teacher and not a big sports fan at all. She actually thought Dean Smith was the dean of a school when he was coming to visit me. But she sat me down and said, Phil Jr., when you're a senior, you can be assured that Coach Smith won't be out promising another high school All-American your starting spot. And I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, the first thing was how intelligent Coach was, how demanding he was, how fair he was, how passionate he was about basketball.
But Coach Smith's passion extended beyond the court. In 1967, only a few years into his career, and right in the middle of the Southern civil rights struggle, he recruited Charlie Scott, UNC's first black scholarship athlete and the first man of color to join a UNC fraternity. Suddenly, for black athletes in the South, anything was possible. Just ask Ford.
Kindergarten through the 8th grade, I went to an all-black school. So you can imagine when Charlie Scott first came on the scene, all of us little kids going to the park trying to emulate Charlie Scott. I remember telling Coach Smith that Charlie Scott was my hero growing up as a kid. And he said, well, maybe because he was the only one out there that looked like you. And I never thought about it that way.
Ford says he was rarely subjected to racism, but in the 60s in Chapel Hill, it was there. In the middle of all that, Dean Smith, who'd become well-known and influential in Chapel Hill, walked Charlie Scott into the nicest all-white restaurant in town, and the owners had no choice but to let them both eat.
It was an awfully impressive stand for a person to make, and to be able to handle the negative feelings and the negative statements. He was just incredibly focused.
Race relations was something that he felt extremely strong about, and you know, he did things, you know, actually before he was Coach Dean Smith, integrating restaurants here. You know, he wasn't as popular and in demand when he was doing those things, which makes it a little bit more special to me.
As time went on, that position strengthened. In the 80s, Roy Williams overheard a phone call in Coach Smith's office.
And I don't know that I've ever told this story to more than 2 or 3 people, but a country club that was calling to offer Coach Smith an honorary membership. And I'll never forget his first statement. He said, "Would you offer this same opportunity to John Thompson?" And there was, I couldn't hear, of course, what was being said on the other side. And Coach said, "Well, I just would not accept an honorary membership or any kind of membership to belong to an organization that would not be open to people of color." It taught me a lesson right at that point, too. So it was not only something that he did in the 60s. It started with his father back in Kansas, that very strong feelings there, and Coach picked up on it even more so and believed it.
I kind of always thought that had I not been a basketball player and had I been at school at the same time that Coach Smith was at school, that we would have been friends. And that was very important to me.
Dean Smith retired in the spring of 1997 as the winningest basketball coach of all time, with 2 national championships, 11 Final Fours, 17 ACC titles, and an Olympic gold medal. But bigger than all the hardware was this moment, North Carolina's celebration of a century in 2010. Coach Smith's memory was already fading, but over 100 former players were there to jog his memory.
I sort of get chill bumps now when I think about it, because we knew he was already having some problems with his illness. Coach Williams, Coach Guthridge, and Coach Fogler walked him out on the floor. Then, and you saw the way the players that were surrounding the court responded to it.
It was a very emotional time. It really was. You had tears running down players' faces. I had tears running down my face. A show of respect, but it was also a show of love.
Woody was talking about goosebumps. I got to admit, I get a little bit every time I hear him talk about it. Mainly because that weekend I was part of it, and a lot of people were here too. The UNC-NC State game, at halftime of that game during the celebration of the century, at half court there, they introduced Dean Smith and about 100 other alumni. They had to delay the start of the second half of the game because there was a giant circle of great stars, North Carolina stars, who would not let him leave without shaking his hand, giving him a hug, and letting them know that they love him. And that's because they all knew that Coach Smith's memory was starting to slip. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, about how Coach Smith is dealing with this neurocognitive disease.
You live right now for those moments of warmth, for those good moments, for that smile.
He could put them together and come up with offenses and defensive principles for us to do that gave us a chance to win every basketball game.
Yeah, you just heard him talking about Coach Smith's beautiful mind when it came to basketball. The kind of thing that had 22,000 fans here on a regular basis standing up and cheering all the time. But it's that mind that really has been a topic of conversation for the last couple of years. And really the last few months since we knew he was going to get the medal, we talked to a lot of his friends and family, and the one common thread that we heard was the fact that Coach Smith is in fact struggling with dementia. So tonight, those closest to him give us the answer to a question that really millions of us want to know. How's Coach Smith doing?
3 of my 4 grandparents had Alzheimer's. Dementia is something that I hear about all the time, and so I'd love to know personally if you've talked to him and how he's doing.
Coach is struggling. There's no question about that. He'll still have some good moments, but it's a very cruel disease. My sister got it at 50 and she was dead at 60, so I've been through it myself.
He's been struggling for 6 or 7 years. There isn't much that we can do.
Good days and bad days. Yeah. Sometimes he'll recognize who I am, and sometimes he won't. But the fact that we still have him is a blessing.
I think he's doing great. He comes into the office 3 or 4 times a week. This is home to him. I'm not sure what he does, but he still comes in. Yeah. And it's just great to see him. He brings life into the office.
You mentioned that he comes in 3 or 4 times. It's almost like that's still kind of a recognition that he has.
It does. It resonates with him. And he feels secure here. He feels safe here. He feels confident here. He feels like this is a place where he wants to be and where he needs to be.
It seems like the Carolina family is really going out of its way to be there for him right now.
I agree with everything you just said, Penn, except for going out of the way.
Just normal?
It's normal. Yeah. I mean, that is the atmosphere that Coach created. The atmosphere of when you're coming to Chapel Hill, stop in and say hello, because I genuinely want to see you.
Every now and then he'll still give you that little look.
Moment of clarity.
And give you that grin.
Yeah.
And you live right now for those moments of warmth, for those good moments, for that smile.
If there is a sadness to this thing, it is the fact that his memory was so sharp. He was one of the most brilliant people I've ever seen, not with what he did in basketball, but he could meet a total stranger today, be introduced to him, and 6 weeks later encountered that stranger, I would bet any amount of money he'd call him by name.
I think all of us have seen folks battle cognitive disease. And I think that particularly to those who have that magical memory, that knew everything, that could recall the smallest details, when that starts to fade, it's even more apparent. And then when you're endeared to that person, it becomes even tougher to see.
If he was there, he'd hear you speaking to me, and he would know who it was by your voice. And the last time I saw him, he didn't. And I decided then, and I don't mean this to sound harsh, I decided then, I really don't want to see him in that condition. I want to remember him the way he was. It's unfortunate for anybody to be in this condition, but he left all of us with a lot of memories.
You really feel for Woody Durham, a man whose job it was for over 3 decades to follow Coach Smith, but it also was great to hear in the middle of that package all that the Carolina family has done to really rally around Coach Smith, to keep this office for him in the Dean's where he comes in all the time, and it's just like any normal day for him. Okay, if we're going to talk about Coach Smith's legacy, we've got to check in with his arch rival. Coming up, Coach K opens up about he and Coach Smith's unique friendship.
Dean was not just a brilliant coach, he was a brilliant man.
But I wish Dean would have stayed forever and ever. Well, he's the greatest coach ever, and I think it will always be.
Okay, that was his longtime assistant, Bill Guthridge, saying he thinks Dean Smith was the greatest coach ever. I think the folks who come here to watch basketball probably will agree with him on that. But, you know, there is some debate about that here in the Triangle. Remember, when you talk about Dean Smith's legacy and being the greatest ever, you got to bring Mike Krzyzewski into the conversation. That debate's probably going to last a little while, but there's no debating how Coach K feels about Coach Smith. So you saw Dean Smith 3 weeks ago?
Yeah, well, you know, Dean and I are very close friends. Obviously, we were amazing competitors, built 2 great programs, and the respect that we have for one another will last forever, and as a result of it, we've become very close friends. Nobody knows our job better than the other guy. From being in it for so many years, and not many people live those lives, and the 2 of us have led that, and both have attained a really high level of excellence.
So a lot of your conversations were about basketball. To win the Presidential Medal of Freedom, you have to be about a lot more than basketball. Why does Dean Smith deserve that award?
When I heard about the announcement of the most prestigious award, really, my wife and I just smiled and said, how deserving. He used the platform that he attained as a coach, and a very successful coach, to have an influence on other areas of our society. That's what we should all do. And Dean did that. In the 60s, he was such a proponent for equal rights, you know, and to step forward like he did was just tremendous. And I believe basketball has been a vehicle to help that in our country. To help people come together of different races, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and he was one of the leaders of that right from the start. You know, bravo, 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 and for our country to recognize that, for President Obama to recognize that is sensational, and it'll bring, when he's honored, it'll bring forward some of those lessons again.
Yeah, you heard Coach K talking about Dean Smith using basketball as a platform. Well, it went well beyond racial equality. We talked about that a lot during this show. But, you know, over the years, Dean Smith was also outspoken about gun control, nuclear weapons, and gay rights. We're coming right back.
And I certainly thank guys that have played here. We've had some great ones, great people, and I'm privileged to have been their coach. And I know they're happy.
I remember that day he retired. I remember crying in my cereal. It was in the morning. I remember looking down, and I didn't expect it to happen, but what a day that was when he retired and thanked his players. You can't talk about the legacy of Coach Smith without talking about the players, the impact he had on them, and really the personal relationships.
Oh, you said it, Penn. He taught them how to play basketball, made them stellar players, of course, but he invested in them, poured into them, and taught them lessons about life.
He taught a lot more than basketball.
Inside the parameters of the court, he was all about the X's and O's, but even within that, he was teaching, and he was teaching about life, and he was teaching about how to take young men into grown men and how to teach you how to behave. Everything from our thought for the day, which was anything from talking about respect for others to tolerance to behavior as a team and as a unit. These were big picture thoughts that he was trying to weave into our everyday life on the court, and he did it masterfully.
His morality was his way of life, and he taught it to us directly and indirectly.
He didn't just act it, he believed it and played the role.
And the stories that we could tell, the impact that he's made in our lives, we can go on for days. He's been invested in my life, and he's been invested in every player that has played for him and has been a part of this program. He was at my wedding. He watched me grow up. He taught me how to be a man. He made me a better basketball player. He was invested.
The best guy there's ever been on the basketball court, and far, far, far better off the court. There's never been anyone like him.
Coach, I've been blessed to have you in my life. I love you.
Thank you for being tough on me. Thank you for showing me. Thank you for sticking with me. Thank you.
I am loving just every interview that we've broadcast tonight, and of course hoping that you all feel the same way. Coach Dean Smith was a legend in basketball. He was a legend in life, and it's fairly safe to say that he will be remembered for years to come.
You want to watch any of this again? It's on WNCN.com. Thank you, Coach Smith. Thank you for UNC for giving us this big old building. Have a great night.